Morning, everybody. Within the first 30 days of the upcoming legislative session, I will submit an executive reorganization order to the Kansas Legislature creating the Kansas Department of Human Services. The new agency will absorb all programs currently associated with the Department for Children and Families, the Department for Aging and Disability Services, and the Juvenile Services Division currently housed at the Department of Corrections. Current DCF and KDAD's Secretary Laura Howard will lead the new Department of Human Services effective July 1st, 2020. From the beginning of my administration, I've made it clear that one of my top priorities is ensuring the safety and well-being of Kansas children and families. Creating this new agency provides us the opportunity to strengthen families and support individuals by focusing on prevention, delivering enhanced services, and forging stronger connections with our community partners. This reorganization is about creating a single point of entry for Kansans who need access in related areas like child welfare, juvenile justice, mental health, and economic supports. We know that Kansas juvenile justice reform has resulted in a reduced need for incarceration by strengthening case management services through community corrections and treating many justice-involved youth in their communities rather than in a facility. Given the needs of families for intergovernmental and community collaboration, it makes sense to organize juvenile justice services and child welfare resources under one umbrella. The new agency reduces the number of systems families will need to navigate for support. And finally, I am confident that Secretary Laura Howard has the vision and the experience to launch a new large agency because she's already been leading two agencies and closely collaborating with the third. I know she will ensure that Kansans are well served because of her commitment to continued improvement and accountability. I'll now turn it over to Secretary Howard, who will provide some additional information about the programs that will be administered by the new agency.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. One of the things that I'd really like to note from the outset that I think is really important when we think about the new Department of Human Services is that this is really about creating a new agency. We're not approaching this with a business as usual mentality. And in fact, it's not just a matter of moving programs from one agency to another. You know, I was reflecting last evening about the fact that some of you might say, gosh, is this about bringing SRS back? It's not. It's about creating a modern human services agency for the century that we're in, with the systems that we have and the opportunities that we have really to enhance prevention, enhance community collaborations, as the governor indicated. The combination of these services in a new agency really gives us an opportunity to think differently about service delivery. We want Kansans to have seamless access to services and programs to allow them to thrive. So when I envision the Department of Human Services, I really do think first about innovation, about modernization, and about close relationships with community partners. You know, people live and thrive in communities, and it's incumbent upon us from the state level to create and maintain those close relationships. Broadly speaking, this new agency will include adult protective services, adult behavioral health, long-term supports and services, economic supports, employment supports, children's mental health, child protective services, juvenile justice services and crossover youth, foster care, and of course, facilities, including the Kansas Juvenile Correctional Complex and the 4 state hospitals. You know, today is just the beginning. We have a lot of work to do between now and July 1st, and I'm very committed to engaging the employees from all 3 enterprises in the strategic development process for the new Department of Human Services. One other thing I want to say as well is that everyone who has a job in one of these agencies today will have a job in the new agency. It may not be the exact job they have now, but we're excited, as we think about that new agency, to identify what those opportunities are for each individual, where folks can best use their talents and their passions, on behalf of Kansans. We also look forward to working with legislators in this process to answer questions as we move forward as the legislative process begins next week. We're prepared to provide informational hearings, one-on-one meetings, and the like to really talk further about the vision that we have for the Department of Human Services. Again, I would thank you for being here today. I think we'd be happy to stand for a few questions now.
What happens to children, families, and aging and disability services? Do they shrink, or how's that work?
The new Department of Human Services will comprise all of what is today the Department for Children and Families, all of what is today the Department for Aging and Disability Services, and the Juvenile Services portion of the Department of Corrections. This isn't about creating this isn't about creating efficiencies, through a new organization. As I've heard the governor say, and I say myself many times, agencies have been very hollowed out. So this will really give us a chance to really thrive through the combination of these programs and services under a new umbrella.
There is a sense that the juvenile justice reform legislation, I think Senate Bill, I'm going to forget what the exact 367, that in some ways that legislation, very well intentioned, to help get children out of juvenile facilities, but maybe increase the burden on child welfare. Is this reorganization going to kind of maybe address some of those concerns, and is that part of the thought process in deciding to do this?
Well, the first thing I would say about juvenile justice reform is, really what an incredible success in terms of reducing the incarceration of youth in this state. Certainly, we have always, across the juvenile justice and child welfare systems, grappled with the issue of what we talk about as crossover youth, those youth who may move between those systems or touch those systems. Certainly, as you alluded to, obviously one of the things that we know is we need to continue to build community capacity and evidence-based programs, which has been happening within juvenile services at DOC, has been happening within child welfare at DCF. But certainly the fact that there's a lot of intersection between those two systems is one of the factors that makes a lot of sense to co-locate juvenile services and child welfare in the same agency.
If I could add on to that, the other reality is that this new agency, Human Services, has a much broader footprint across the state, so that those kids who are diverted from the justice system will have better access to the community-based programs that are available through the cooperation between Human Services and community corrections folks.
I've got a question though. At times DCF has struggled with some of these child welfare issues. You have these cases crop up where people alert you to something, the DCF to something going on, and the right things don't seem to happen. So I'm kind of struggling to see how making the bureaucracy bigger and putting it all under one agency, I'm struggling to see how that helps with that problem. And then that raises the question about juvenile justice. Some of these kids get into that system through something akin to a criminal system, and that doesn't seem to fit the mission of a human services agency exactly.
Yeah, let me say a couple of things about that, John. I think as I think about the value of the new organization, one of the tremendous values is putting a greater emphasis on prevention across all of the systems that will be encompassed through this new agency. That's particularly important when we think about youth, providing those supports and services before a crisis takes place, and really having those supports and services in place that can really help to avert entry into either the child welfare or the juvenile justice system as a formal system of care. So I think the ability to have that constellation of preventative resources and a focus in that regard will be a significantly strong focus of the organization. Yeah, clearly, juvenile justice has obviously a component that is through the criminal justice system, but we do know that the intersections for those families, the broader array of needs that those families have fit very well with the human services system. And we also know that with juvenile justice reform, more and more of youth who might have previously touched the juvenile justice system won't be touching that system anymore. So it's really incumbent that we have the services and supports they need through the human services lens.
But I'm kind of curious, what about the current system with a separate KDADS and a separate DCF and juvenile justice basically under the Department of Corrections? What about that system is preventing you from doing what you really want to do? You emphasizing prevention, for example.
You can always collaborate together across agencies, and we worked really hard just over the last year to do that across all three agencies. I think I've had a particularly interesting venue leading two agencies to see what the opportunity would be through bringing things together, perhaps organizing in some different ways, and making use of really all the resources that touch across those systems. The governor alluded to just the larger footprint that human services has across the state, not just through our regional offices, but through the many partners we work through in other systems such as mental health. So I think from my vantage point, it really just gives an opportunity to be more effective in making those kinds of connections, having more seamless services for families, and the ability to create more opportunities for families and communities to access things in an easier way.
What happens to the secretaries of those of DCF and KDAD?
Well, Laura's right here, and Jeff is right there, and they'll stay where they are in their respective offices.
Will she need to be reconfirmed if there's a new agency?
Pardon me?
Will she have to be reconfirmed if there's a new agency?
I don't have any idea. I doubt it, but
There is a legislative process for the executive reorganization order. I mean, as the governor mentioned in her remarks, so the executive reorganization order will go in front of the legislature. They have 60 days to consider that. They don't have to approve it, but they have 60 days within which they could take action on that.
One last question.
Yeah.
What other issues or events were there that prompted this change, other than juvenile justice?
there was no one event. I've always thought that a one-stop shop for people needing to access government services makes a whole lot more sense. It's a much more efficient way to operate, a much more effective way to operate. So this is just a culmination of what I've always thought.
And no more people. Employment stays about the same. Just they work together better because they're all part of it. They don't have to check to see if they can talk to someone at a different agency. Just more efficient.
It's not only more efficient in terms of humans being side by side or on the same team working together, but there also will be technology interfacing that can happen more seamlessly now than it would with separate agencies.
The previous thinking when some of these things like juvenile justice was broke out into a separate agency at one point, they created the Department on Aging, was that a smaller agency was a sign that you were going to have people focused on that one area rather than getting it lost in the larger bureaucracy. Have you seen evidence that that kind of thinking is just not correct?
Well, you know, John, I think if you look under the umbrella of the Department of Human Services, or currently in DCF and KDADS, you will see that there are divisions that focus on the specific populations, and that will continue.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.